we're going to be talking today at what you need to know as the PCBU with hazardous substances on your site. For those who have forgotten, a PCBU is a person conducting a business or undertaking, and in most cases that's going to be the company entity itself. There are a whole lot of other things that can be a PCBU, but generally we're talking about the company. The short answer is that you have to know what you need to know. And before I forget, we are having some work done on our alarm system today. So if you do happen to hear an alarm go off, don't panic. Someone will come and get me if there happens to be a real one at the same time. What we're going to look at today is a brief look. Bang on cue. We'll have a brief look at the duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act, what the rules are that relate to hazardous substances, what's in the hazardous substance regulations themselves, what questions you need to be asking of your team, and some other things to be aware of. So hopefully you all have some familiarity with the Health and Safety at Work Act. It's been around for a few years now, and we've got a number of duties under the Act. So each of these parties have duties, and as an individual you may fit into one or more of the categories at one stage or another. The officers must exercise due diligence to ensure that the PCBU complies with its duties or obligations. So when we talk about PCBU duties, it is the officers, the directors and so forth that have to make sure that the PCBU does what it needs to do. All workers have to take reasonable care of their own health and safety, the health and safety of others, and comply and cooperate with the PCBU. So you set rules to make sure that it's a safe workplace and the workers need to follow them. Other people at workplaces, such as visitors, must take reasonable care of their own health and safety, and again, the health and safety of others, and comply with the PCBU instructions. So the rules that the place that you're visiting has in place. The PCBU has the primary duty of care, and that is to ensure the health and safety of your workers that you influence, and other people. And this includes, so far as is reasonably practicable, and that's a term that's defined in the Act, about providing and maintaining a work environment that is without risks to health and safety. So without risks seems like a very absolute terminology, and then we feed that back into as far as reasonably practicable. We need to make sure that we've got safe plant structures, systems of work, that we ensure the safe use, handling, storage of plant substances and structures. So this is where we're starting to refer to substances, which includes hazardous substances, but it also includes things that might not be considered a hazardous substance. You need to make sure that you're providing adequate facilities for the welfare at work of your workers, and any information, training, instruction or supervision that is necessary to protect people from risks. There's also requirements for monitoring the health of workers and the conditions at the workplace for the purposes of preventing injury or illness. So these all come under that primary duty of care that the PCBU has. There are specific duties for specific PCBUs. So a PCBU who manages or controls a workplace. So that's generally most people when we think about the business and the workers and what happens at their workplace. There are specific duties for PCBUs who manage or control fixtures, fittings or plant, and those who design, manufacture, import or supply plant substances or structures. So if you are a manufacturer of a hazardous substance, an importer or a supplier of them, there are specific duties for you under the Act. And also anyone who installs or constructs plant or structures has specific PCBU duties. So hopefully that's just reminding you of why we're here. So moving on to the rules that relate to hazardous substances, and certainly the more you think about it, the more rules that you can come across. So the ones that we're briefly going to be looking at are the Health and Safety at Work hazardous substance regulations, and these are the main ones that we think about when we think about the hazardous substance regulations. There are also, under the Health and Safety at Work Act, the General Risk and Workplace Management Regulations, GRIM, There are the asbestos regulations, although asbestos is more of a hazardous material than a hazardous substance. There are major hazard facility regulations. There are also specific ones for mining, quarrying and petroleum exploration. So these are all industries that have hazardous substances and have specific rules about them. There are also safe work instruments that can amend or modify regulations. And there's also the EPA notices. So the Hasno Act, and it is still around, has the EPA notices in them. So we're going to touch on each of these, looking in more detail at the hazardous substance regulations. So GRIM, our General Risk and Workplace Management Regulations. These apply to all workplaces, and so they're providing a good general risk set of rules in place. So it's about our hazard identification and control, and an example of the control hierarchy. If we can eliminate the hazard, we can minimise it, what controls we can put in place. And there at the bottom of our control hierarchy, we've got PPE. There are requirements here for supervision, training and instruction. So that's making sure that for any work that you do, any sort of equipment or substances, that you are training your staff so that they know how to safely use those without causing harm to themselves or other people. That people have suitable supervision before they work unattended, and that they have knowledge of all of the equipment and personal protective equipment that they may be required to use. There are specific factors about the facilities at workplaces covered by these regulations, so about lighting and ventilation, and also control of airborne contaminants. So these are again things that can relate to hazardous substances, but apply more broadly as well. There are requirements for emergency plans across the board, so looking at any sort of emergency that could apply at your workplace. And we'll see later when we look at the hazardous substance regulations that we need emergency plans there as well, but there are thresholds that apply. So coming back to these general risk and workplace management regs, emergency plans covering the likely emergencies that you're going to have at your workplace are required for every workplace, including those that only have a small amount of hazardous substances or even no hazardous substances. And there are a few bits of information in these regulations about personal protective equipment. Going back to that hierarchy of controls, it is the last option that you should be using if you are looking at controlling your hazards. But if PPE is required to be used, then it needs to be supplied by the PCBU, and there's a few other specific things there. There are also regulations under GRIM dealing with particular risks. So for atmospheres with potential for fire and explosion, it comes under these regulations as well. So if you've got a flammable liquid or a flammable gas, you've got LPG on site, we know we need to keep ignition sources away from those, and those are covered by the hazardous substance regulations, but there is a potential for fire or explosion from substances or materials that are not hazardous substances, and so aren't covered by the hazardous substance regulations. And the more common example that would fit under here would be combustible dust. So if you've got flour in a bakery, make sure you have those dusts under control to prevent explosion. There are some risks associated with containers of liquid. So again, if they're hazardous substances, we've got controls about those properties, but there's also the physical drowning risk with those. So if you've got vats or sumps or pits or other vessels, make sure that people can't actually fall in and drown in them. And similarly, for if you've got loose but enclosed materials, such as a grain silo or silos of powder, making sure that people can't become engulfed in those. In relation to substances hazardous to health, and this can be broader than hazardous substances, there are requirements around exposure monitoring and health monitoring. And there's also some restrictions on the sort of work that young people can do. So people under 15 years old aren't allowed to be involved in work in the manufacture, use or generation of hazardous substances. And there's other types of work as well that you're not allowed to have workers under the age of 15 doing. And that's a quick rundown of the GRIM regulations. Just get my mouse there. So moving entirely to the other end of the scale, GRIM is covering every workplace, even if they've got a small amount of hazardous substances. Now moving up to the major hazard facility regulation. So if you've got a particularly large amount of hazardous substances. So major hazard facilities are those that hold typically very large quantities of high hazard materials. I'm sorry, I don't know where those subtitles have come from. You'll be designated, depending on the quantity of hazardous substances that you have, as a lower or upper tier major hazard facility. The thresholds are based around the hazard class of the substance. For example, if you had more than 50 tonnes of a class 6.1b toxic substance, that would trigger a major hazard facility. And there are also thresholds that relate to specific substances. So for methanol, the threshold is much higher. You need to have at least 500 tonnes. But for some arsenic compounds, that can be as low as 100 kilograms. And there is a method for assessing the threshold when there are multiple substances on site. The work that the PCBU needs to do depends on whether or not you're a lower or upper tier major hazard facility, but it's about making sure that you've got good systems in place so that if something does go wrong, then you've got the safety managed. If you're interested in knowing what sorts of operations of major hazard facilities, there is a public register on the WorkSafe website. Moving on. In case you weren't aware, the Hasno Act did not disappear when the changes of the regulations occurred in 2017. So there's still a lot in the Hasno Act around hazardous substances and new organisms, but most of what you need for your workplace management is in the hazardous substance regulations. EPA has the regulatory role under the Hasno Act. The main tool that they have, rather than a set of regulations, is EPA notices, and so they typically cover hazardous substances at the end of the life cycle. So from approval and classification of substances and disposal are covered by EPA, and they also have requirements that are not for workplaces. So if you've got hazardous substances at home, and also ecotoxic substances come under the EPA. There are specific requirements for importers or manufacturers of hazardous substances that are governed by the EPA. And so if you do import or manufacture, you're a supplier of hazardous substances, then you should be familiar with these rules. And these are the top 5 as chosen by the EPA. You are required to provide the EPA with your business contact information. So there's an EPA notice about it, and there's a wee form online, which is quite straightforward, really. It's about just telling them who you are so that if the EPA needs to contact people who import or supply, they know where all those businesses are. You need to know the ingredients of your products and whether or not they're hazardous, and then also that they are approved hazardous substances. You need to ensure that you are supplying a current and up-to-date safety data sheet, that you label your hazardous substances correctly, and that you package your products properly. So these are all duties on PCBUs who are suppliers. Once the substances arrive at the workplace PCBU needs to ensure that they do keep a copy of the safety data sheet, that the labelling does remain legible and in good condition, and that the packages are not falling to bits. The GHS is coming. You may have heard that there are changes coming to the classification system. The Hasno classification system that we've all come to know and love over the last 20 years was based on a very early edition of GHS. And so over the time, there's been a mismatch between how New Zealand classifies hazardous substances and how the rest of the world in the globally harmonised system, the GHS, do that classification. There's been some consultation a couple of times in the past, but it is actually coming now that we will be transitioning to the GHS starting next year. So a bit of a time frame here. We're expecting the new documents to be published later this month. So that will be all the new group standard documents, the classification group EPA notice, everything that we need to know about the change to GHS, and then this will come into force in April 2021, so next year. There will be a 4-year transition period for labelling and safety data sheets. So if you are a supplier or a manufacturer, you do have up to 4 years to get these up to date with the new GHS classification system. But bearing in mind that the labelling requires at the moment under Hasno is very, very similar, if not identical, to some of the GHS requirements. And then within the next 5 years, there is a requirement that the hazardous substance regulations will need to be updated, but there's that 5-year period for it. So in the meantime, when it comes to our hazardous substance regulations, which is our next topic of discussion, those will continue as usual for the immediate future. So nothing's going to change too drastically. Right. Let's get on to the main act, so to speak, the hazardous substance regulations. I'm going to start, and bear with me here, by going through the whole regulations. There's only 579 pages for it, and so we'll see if we can get that through. 5 minutes should be enough. And then I'll pick out some of the key duties of what we'll be looking at. The PCBU gets quite a workout here. So there are around about 650 individual regulations, and about 70% of them say something that the PCBU needs to do. It is the duty of the PCBU. The PCBU must ensure all these things. And then nicely at the bottom there, a PCBU who contravenes this regulation will be subject to fines and penalties. So this is where the bulk of your PCBU duties for hazardous substances do appear. Okay, let's start at the beginning. There are some very important sections in the preliminary information, including the definitions and interpretation. So if you do need to go back and look at regulations, and hopefully it's not something you need to do on a regular basis, those early bits can be important. With labelling, signage, safety data sheets and packaging, as I said earlier, labelling, safety data sheets and packaging, everything that arrives at your workplace should be compliant. That's the duty of the PCBU, who is your supplier. You need to make sure that these are maintained in good condition. Signage is a separate thing, but we need to make sure that there is suitable warning at your site so that your workers and emergency services at your site are warned before they encounter the hazard of what's present. In part 3, which is a very small part, there are 2 key duties. So one is about keeping an inventory. Knowing what hazardous substances you have is an absolute fundamental to ensuring that you are compliant. You may have seen the earlier webinar I did on how do I keep track of my hazardous substances, and in that I go through how you can use the hazardous substance calculator tool to help you create an inventory and tell you what the key controls for those substances are. My other regulation that I'm starting to enjoy more and more, and I know I enjoy the regulations way too much. Regulation 3.2 is about managing the risks associated with your hazardous substances. So forgetting about all of the other regulations we have, the PCBU must manage your risks to health and safety associated with your hazardous substances. The regulations give us a whole lot of things that we need to do, but if the risks associated with your substances, whether it's an oddball substance or the way that you use it is unusual, then make sure that you have addressed any additional or alternative risks that may have arisen. And seeing as we've got a regulation up here, we can see at the bottom here that if you fail to manage your risks and you become convicted, then there are fines of $10,000 or $50,000, and that depends on whether the PCBU is an individual or an organisation. Right, let's move back to the regs. With training and supervision under the new regulations, all workers who work with hazardous substances need to receive training, instruction and supervision, and you need to have records of this. And it's not usually an issue with making sure that you're doing the training, but it's ensuring that you've got the records that demonstrate it. Some substances, explosives and highly toxic substances, require certified handlers. The section on emergency management covers some minimum fire extinguisher requirements and then details what is needed for your emergency response plan. And as I said earlier, all sites, all workplaces under the GRIM regulations need to have emergency plans. If you've got over certain threshold amounts of hazardous substances, then you'll need a hazardous substance emergency response plan that's dealing with those particular risks from those substances. So sections 6 and 7, so that's rules for compliance certifiers, so not really for PCBUs, and some substances do require controlled substance licenses to possess the substance, so that's different from a certified handler certificate for using the substance. And we're again looking at explosives and highly toxic fumigants, vertebrate poisons, etc. there. The next grouping relate to the hazardous properties of the substances. So we're looking at class 1, explosives, classes 2, 3 and 4, our flammable gases, liquids and solids. We've got our class 5 substances, our oxidizers and organic peroxides, class 6 and 8, our toxic and corrosive substances, and there's specific controls on fumigants. When we think of our substances, most substances will have more than one classification, and most workplaces will have more than one hazardous substance. The sorts of controls that come up in these regulations include security for your substances, making sure that unauthorised people can't access them, separating from incompatible substances, preventing things from going boom when you don't want them to go boom, making sure that you've got suitable storage locations and that they're certified if they need to be, and that there are separation distances or control zones in place so that if something does go wrong, it doesn't spread to protected places or other areas that we don't want to burn down. And I said 5 minutes for the regulations, we're getting through them. So sections 15 and 16 are more infrastructure ones about gas cylinders and tank wagons. Stationary container systems, these apply to most tanks and process containers for liquids. And there's a set of rules is telling you about the design standards and how they're built and operated. Then for a subset of these, stationary container certification will be required. Under our laboratories, there is a slightly alternative compliance regime for research and teaching laboratories. And the earlier ambiguous terminology of exempt laboratory has gone, but these laboratories do have to comply with all these ones. Apply to the laboratories as well. There's a couple of things that they don't need to do, but the rules do apply to a laboratory. And section 19 is tracking, keeping records of the most highly hazardous substances. Who has them, where are they, how much is there, and what has happened to them. So these are still in place as well. And before we stop, just like at the beginning of the regulations, there is information held in the end parts of the regulations that can be quite important, including provisions for grandfathering in some situations that might have been compliant in the past but no longer are. So that includes some things around separation distances for LPG tanks. Piece of cake. Right. Rather than go through the regulations one by one, what I thought would make more sense to you is to Ask questions. As the PCBU, you want to ensure that you have confidence that your site is being managed correctly, that people are doing the right things. So we can break this down into questions about the substances, about the people, about our certification, our day-to-day operations, and our emergency management. Channel your inner 4-year-old. I've got one of those. The questions are everywhere. So about our substances, do we know what we have, and is it everything that we've got? Sites can be very good at keeping track of the substances that they use for their core business. So their ingredients and their products, good information, but the substances that are used to help support the business sometimes get forgotten. Do we know why we have everything? Having containers of substances that might come in handy one day turns into more of a liability. Do we still need it? Do we need to have this much of it on site immediately? Do we have safety data sheets for each substance? And are they up to date? And can people access them if they need the information? Do they understand the information that's provided on safety data sheet? And if we've got highly hazardous substances, are those tracking records being kept? Our people. Do we know who actually works with our hazardous substances? When it comes to training our workers, we need to make sure that we have identified everyone. So not everyone at the workplace will need to have the same level of training in hazardous substances. So we need to know who works with what and what sort of role that they have. Do we know what they need to know? And do they know it? And can we show that they know exactly what we need? That they do know it, they have the competency. Do we have the records to demonstrate it so that in the event if something does go wrong, we don't have to just say, of course we've trained everyone, here's the evidence for it. Similarly with experience, do they have the experience and can we show it? And what processes do we have in place for teaching new people about our processes, about our site? If you're bringing on someone new to a job and they've got the appropriate qualifications from their previous work, they'll still need to be taught things that are specific to your site, and you'll need to document that. When it comes to certification, what compliance certificates do you need to have? Which ones do you have? The main ones that we think about are location compliance certificates, certified handlers, approved fillers, so these are for anyone who fills a gas cylinder, and our stationary container certificates. There are threshold quantities, so that if you change the amount that you have on site or change the substances, you may need new certification, your certification might not be required anymore. That could be a key business decision for you. You need to know and be aware of what the certification actually means. So a location compliance certificate is very much like a warrant of fitness for your car. It's what the inspector saw on the day and the evidence that you provided them. If 6 months down the track your tyres have gone bald, it does not mean that you're compliant just because you've got your warrant of fitness. And if 2 months after your certifier has left, your signs fall down, you're not compliant even if you've got a location compliance certificate. You also need to be aware that your certificate, particularly your location certificate, is only certifying that a very specific range of compliance matters have been met. So there might be things on your site that you need to comply with, but are not something that is being certified by that location certificate. So just make sure that you understand what the certification actually does mean. Have a look at your site on a day-to-day basis. Does everything look right? Can you read the labels? One of the things that I often find with labels is I'm not sure where it's come from, but sometimes the most convenient way to place a container with the handle or whatever is with the label facing away, and that's just not helpful to anyone. Making sure your containers are in good condition, the signs are in the right place, you haven't had a big change in your substances that mean that signs are now obsolete, that things are still secured where they need to be, that there's not evidence of spills. Just looking with a higher level or a different pair of eyes at what's actually happening on a day-to-day basis can be really valuable for helping assess your compliance. And our last set of questions I'm going to ask is about emergency management. Do you have a plan? I've addressed that you need to have a plan. Do you need one for specific hazardous substances? And what are you going to do? And are you going to do things that aren't in your plan? Do people know exactly what they should be doing? And how do you know that they know this? So they've had some training, they've read the plan. Doing practical exercises really helps reinforce what people should be doing, because instinct is a really big factor when it comes to emergency management. Do you have all the equipment that you need? One of the requirements in the emergency management regulations is that FENS have an opportunity to comment on your plan, so that they understand what's at your site and that they can let you know if you have expectations for them that are not what they're going to do. So make sure you understand what FENS can do and what other external support that you might need. So if you do have a spill, have you got the resources on site to clean it up yourself, or are you actually going to need to call someone? And do they know what is exactly needed there? You do need to test your emergency procedures. And before we finish up for the session, there's a few other matters I just wanted to touch on that do relate to your PCBU duties. In relation to your neighbours, there are two factors I wanted to talk about. One of your controls is about having separation distances to protected and public places, and these distances are permitted to go across your property boundary if you have your neighbours' consent. So that's something to be aware of, where you might need to have some cooperation with your neighbours, or they might be asking you for this consent. And just make sure that you understand what's being asked for there. It's really about making sure that whatever activity is happening in that overlapping distance stays that way, and that if it changes, then the appropriate changes can be made on the site with the hazardous substances. Also with your neighbours, do you know how to contact them in the event of an emergency on your site? What would you tell them? What do they need to know? And do your neighbours have the right contact information for you in case something goes wrong on their site? You need to be aware that there may be overlapping duties for PCBUs. So if you do have duties that overlap, and whether that's two organisations working at the same workplace or workers working on another site, if you've got those overlapping duties, you must, as far as reasonably practicable, consult, cooperate and coordinate your activities. You can't just contract out your duties under the Act, so that you just say, well, company A will deal with it and I don't have to think about it. You need to make sure that you clearly understand who's doing what, but the duties remain with both parties. As the PCBU with a location certificate, you can apply to WorkSafe for an extension if you require, or if you like. So if you've got a good compliance history, nothing's changing, every year you're getting a location certificate, no problem, you could apply to WorkSafe to get that extended for up to 3 years. And if for some reason you don't comply with the regulations, but you've got other systems in place to mitigate the risk, you can apply to WorkSafe for an exemption from the Health and Safety at Work Act. These need to be specific to the non-compliant matters, so it's not an exemption to the Act or the regulations, but it's an exemption or a variation to a particular part that's not compliant for one reason or another, and you've got other risk mitigation in place so that the overall risk profile is not increased. These exemptions, if they're granted, can only be issued for up to 5 years at a time, so they do present a business risk, and that they might not necessarily be renewed when the time comes. And while we've been talking about WorkSafe, there are a number of times when you might need to actually talk to WorkSafe about your hazardous substances. So if you're establishing a new hazardous substance location, and this is a defined term, so it's over a certain threshold of hazardous substances, you need to notify WorkSafe that this location exists, and it should be done up to 30 days before it's actually commissioned, or at least 30 days. It's a shorter period for LPG. If you're increasing the quantity of substances at your hazardous substance location, you'll also need to re-notify. So you're not when you get your location compliance certificate, one of the things being checked is that you don't exceed your notified quantity. Your certifier, if they come to your site to do an inspection for your location, if they cannot issue that, they are required under Part 6 of the regulations to notify WorkSafe if they can't issue a location certificate there. If you're a major hazard facility, there's a range of notifiable incidents, including some near misses need to be reported. And then under the Health and Safety at Work Act, there's a range of notifiable incidents, injuries and illnesses that come into place. So I hope that gives you a bit of a rundown and an overview of where the PCBU responsibilities lie under the Health and Safety at Work Act and the Hazardous Substance Regulations. And the key takeaway is that it is the responsibility of the PCBU to understand exactly what they have on their site, what the risks and hazards are, and what the requirements are to manage these. Chrissy will send out an email after this with further information. But thank you for your attendance, and I shall stop this share. I'll have a look and just see if any questions did appear. But otherwise, thank you for bearing with me. I still don't know where those subtitles came from, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.